The arrival of the contest. The Galactic Union's arena shimmered under the artificial light of 1,000 distant stars. It was the grand stage for the most anticipated event in interstellar history, the Galactic Survival Championship. Species from across the galaxy gathered to prove their resilience, adaptability, and ingenuity. Each team was given the same set of tools, a primitive emergency survival kit, and dropped on a barren moon with no atmosphere, extreme temperatures, and predatory threats lurking in the shadows. The humans arrived late. Their shuttle docked in the sprawling arena, its surface scratched and unpolished compared to the sleek crafts of other species. The crowd of alien spectators burst into laughter. To them, humans were an oddity, a young species from a remote planet they called a death world. Their survival was more a mystery than an achievement, and few believed they'd last a single day in the contest. The alien teams, tall and regal in their flowing uniforms, exchanged amused glances as the human team stepped forward. They were unremarkable in appearance, with no visible adaptations like claws, extra limbs, or hardened exoskeletons. "Is this some kind of joke?" sneered an Ilveran competitor, their scales glinting in the artificial light. "They don't even have natural armor." The humans said nothing. Their leader, a middle-aged man named Captain Reed, calmly surveyed the arena. His expression gave nothing away, but his team's quiet confidence unnerved a few observers. The Galactic Coordinator, a towering, six-eyed creature named Veltor, stepped to the podium. "Welcome, competitors," they announced, their voice booming across the arena. "You stand on the edge of the most unforgiving moon in this sector. Your task is simple: survive for 7 days with the tools provided. May the best species win." With a wave of Veltor's appendage, the emergency kits were distributed. Each kit contained a basic fire starter, a thin roll of thermal material, a water purifier, and a few nutrient cubes. The alien teams examined the items with disdain. "This is a test of ingenuity," scoffed a Zixorian warrior, tossing the fire starter aside. "We're advanced beings, not primitives." But the humans didn't complain. Captain Reed crouched over the kit, carefully inspecting each item. His second-in-command, a young woman named Sarah, whispered, "Looks like they really want to test us." Reed smirked. "Good. Let's show them what we can do." As the contestants were transported to the surface of the moon, the crowd erupted in cheers and jeers. The aliens flaunted their confidence, discussing advanced strategies to manipulate their surroundings. Meanwhile, the humans stood silently, their focus unshaken. The barren moon stretched endlessly, a desolate wasteland of jagged rocks and pale dust. The sun's glare was unrelenting, while the shadows promised freezing death. The moment the humans touched the ground, they sprang into action. "Check the terrain," Reed ordered. "Sarah, inventory the kit. Mark, find us a windbreak." Within minutes, they located a sheltered crevice between two large rocks. Using the thermal material, they constructed a makeshift canopy, securing it with stones and the moon's gravity. Other teams watched from a distance, perplexed by the humans' efficiency. "They're moving like they've done this before," muttered a Grolic competitor, his antennae twitching in confusion. "They're just pretending," said another. "They'll panic soon enough." But the humans didn't panic. As the sun dipped below the horizon, plunging the moon into bone-chilling darkness, they lit a small fire using the starter. The flames danced under the canopy, casting warm light over their camp. From their observation deck, the Galactic Union officials watched with growing curiosity. "They're not using the tools as intended," Veltor remarked, leaning forward. "Perhaps they've misunderstood the challenge," replied an aide. "Or perhaps," Veltor said, narrowing their 6 eyes, "they understand it better than anyone else." The first night fell hard on the other teams. Without preparation, many struggled to adapt. The Ilveran's sleek shelters collapsed under the weight of freezing winds. The Zixorians failed to start a fire, relying on their natural heat resistance, which proved insufficient. Cries of frustration echoed across the moon's desolate surface. Meanwhile, the humans sat huddled around their fire, their faces calm but focused. Captain Reed took a nutrient cube and split it evenly among the team. "Eat slow. Conserve energy," he said. Sarah glanced at the distant flickers of alien camps. "They're struggling already. Should we help?" "Not yet," Reed replied. "We're here to survive, not to play heroes. But if they come to us—" He left the sentence unfinished, a glint of resolve in his eyes. As the night stretched on, a faint blue glow appeared in the distance. It was the humans' fire, visible from miles away, a beacon of warmth and defiance in the unyielding cold. The alien teams stared at it with a mix of envy and disbelief. How could a species so mocked, so underestimated, already be thriving? Little did they know, the humans were just getting started. The first test. As the pale, icy dawn broke over the barren moon, the alien teams emerged from their battered shelters. Frost clung to their bodies, and exhaustion was etched across their faces. For many, the first night had been harsher than expected. The humans, on the other hand, were already awake. Captain Reed and his team had dismantled their makeshift canopy and were carefully repacking their kit. The fire had long since been extinguished, its ashes buried to hide their tracks. "We need to keep moving," Reed said, his voice calm but firm. "Staying in one place makes us predictable." The others nodded. Sarah tightened her pack, glancing at the horizon. "The terrain ahead looks rough. We'll need water soon." Mark, the team's engineer, held up the small purifier from the kit. "This thing won't last long if the water's too contaminated. We should scout for a clean source." As they prepared to leave, a distant rumble echoed across the desolate landscape. It was faint at first, but it grew louder, vibrating through the ground beneath their feet. The humans froze, instinctively crouching low. "What's that?" Sarah whispered, scanning the horizon. From behind a ridge, a massive, insect-like creature emerged. Its exoskeleton shimmered under the harsh light, and its mandibles clicked rhythmically as it prowled the rocky terrain. The alien teams, still recovering from the night, erupted in chaos. The Ilverans scrambled to fortify their collapsed shelters, while the Zixorians attempted to drive the creature away with loud ultrasonic pulses. The predator, unfazed, turned its attention toward the nearest camp. Captain Reed motioned for his team to stay low. "Let it pass. It's not hunting us. Yet." The humans watched as the creature descended on an unprepared Grolic camp. Its pincers tore through their flimsy defenses, scattering the terrified competitors. The crowd in the observation deck erupted into gasps and murmurs. "They weren't ready for this," Veltor said, their 6 eyes narrowing. "But the humans, they're watching, calculating." Reed's team didn't waste the opportunity. While the predator was distracted, they moved swiftly and silently, weaving through the jagged rocks toward higher ground. When they reached a small plateau, Sarah pointed to a glimmer in the distance. "That looks like a water source. Could be a frozen spring." Mark nodded. "If it's frozen, we can melt it. But we'll need to set up quickly before anything else shows up." The team descended toward the glimmering patch of ice. Along the way, they passed another alien camp. The Ilverans were huddled together, their sleek bodies trembling from the cold and fear. One of them, a young scout, spotted the humans and called out weakly, "Please, help us." Sarah hesitated, glancing at Reed. "Captain." Reed's expression hardened. "We don't have much to spare, but leaving them here to die doesn't sit right." He pulled a small strip of thermal material from his pack and handed it to the Ilveran scout. "Use this to stabilize your shelter and get your team moving. This place isn't safe." The Ilveran nodded gratefully, their large eyes shimmering with relief. "Thank you. We underestimated this challenge, and your people." Reed gave a curt nod and continued toward the frozen spring. When they arrived, the humans worked quickly. Mark used the fire starter to heat a small metal container, melting the ice into drinkable water. The purifier hummed as it filtered out impurities. "This should last us a day," Mark said, handing Sarah a filled canteen. "We'll need to find another source soon." As they drank, a shadow passed over them. The humans instinctively ducked, their hands moving toward makeshift weapons. Above them, a sleek drone hovered, its metallic surface reflecting the sunlight. "It's one of the observation drones," Sarah whispered. "They're watching us." Reed smirked. "Good. Let them watch." From the observation deck, Veltor leaned closer to the screen displaying the humans. "They're resourceful," they murmured. "Far more than we gave them credit for." An aide beside them frowned. "But they're helping others. That could jeopardize their own survival." "Perhaps," Veltor said. "Or perhaps they understand something we don't." As the second day began, the humans moved with a purpose, their every action deliberate. They knew the moon was testing not just their endurance, but their ingenuity and moral resolve. And while the other teams scrambled to adapt, the humans were already thinking several steps ahead. The struggle intensifies. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the barren moon. The temperature was rapidly dropping, and the wind howled through the jagged rocks. Reed and his team had made it through the first night, but they knew that the worst was still ahead. The second day of the challenge had proven more difficult than expected. The terrain was unforgiving, and their resources were dwindling faster than planned. Water, while abundant in the form of frozen springs, was precious and needed to be rationed carefully. The emergency kit provided basic tools, but nothing that could last indefinitely. Captain Reed's mind raced. There had to be something more they could do to stay ahead of the others. He scanned the rocky landscape ahead, his thoughts interrupted by a sudden shout from Sarah. "Captain, you need to see this." Reed and Mark rushed over to where Sarah stood. Her eyes were fixed on something in the distance, her hand pointing toward the horizon. A large group of alien competitors had gathered at the base of a towering cliff. The Zyxorians, whose agility was unmatched by most, were already scaling it with ease. "That's a strategic location," Reed muttered, adjusting his gear. "High ground gives them an advantage." "We should go for it," Mark suggested, a plan already forming in his mind. "No," Reed said, shaking his head. "We need to think differently. That high ground won't help if we can't find a way to hold it. It's more about survival now than competition." As they continued to watch, the Zyxorians reached the top and began scanning the area. Their sharp eyes swept across the barren land, looking for any sign of an advantage. They seemed confident, but Reed knew better. It wasn't about strength or speed here. It was about intelligence, adaptation, and resourcefulness. "We'll find our own path," Reed declared. "Let's move before they spot us." The team began to descend, making their way along the rugged cliffs and avoiding the groups of aliens who were still caught up in their own strategies. As they moved, Mark pulled out a map from the emergency kit. "We'll need to stay off the main trails," Mark said, tracing his finger along a path that appeared to lead to a cluster of caves. "If we can get there, we might be able to find shelter and something to help us with the next phase of the challenge." "We'll need to be quick," Reed warned. "The longer we take, the more dangerous it becomes." Their journey was far from easy. The terrain became increasingly treacherous, and with each step, the humans could feel the weight of the challenge bearing down on them. Yet, unlike the alien teams, the humans showed no signs of panic. Every move they made was calculated, and every decision was made with the survival of the team in mind. Sarah took the lead, her sharp eyes scanning the terrain for any signs of danger. "I've got something," she said, pointing toward a cluster of rocks up ahead. As they neared, the team saw that it was a small cave, partially hidden behind a pile of boulders. "This is it," Reed said. "We'll set up here for now." They quickly made camp inside the cave, huddling together for warmth. It was cramped, but it would provide them with much-needed shelter. Reed pulled out the emergency flare from the kit and lit it, sending a bright signal into the sky. Mark glanced up at the flare. "That's a dangerous move." The others will see it. I know, Reed said, his voice steady, but it's a calculated risk. We need to draw their attention away from us. We're too close to the other teams for comfort. The flare arced high into the air, its bright light a beacon for all who were watching. For a moment, everything seemed to pause. The wind, the cold, and even the alien teams, who had been too caught up in their own struggles to notice. Then, as expected, the sound of distant engines reached their ears. The observation drones had taken notice. "We've got company," Sarah said, her voice tense. "We need to move," Reed ordered, packing up the kit with practiced efficiency, "before they get too close." But before they could make a move, a low growl echoed through the cave. The predator from earlier had returned, its huge, insectoid body emerging from the shadows. It had been stalking them since they'd made their camp. The team froze, the adrenaline coursing through their veins. "What do we do?" Sarah whispered, her eyes wide. Reed's mind raced. They didn't have weapons to fight the creature. But they did have one thing: the environment itself. "We need to use the cave," Reed said. "Stay close to the walls and keep quiet. We'll wait for it to make a move." The predator, its senses heightened, prowled closer, its antennae twitching as it scanned the air. The humans held their breath, not daring to make a sound. Then, just as the creature drew closer, Reed made his move. He picked up a rock and threw it into the darkness at the far side of the cave. The predator's attention snapped toward the noise. It scurried away from the human's hiding spot, drawn by the sound of the rock. The team held their ground, waiting for the creature to move further away before they slipped out into the open. "That was too close," Sarah muttered, her voice barely above a whisper. Reed nodded. "We're not out of danger yet. Let's go." They swiftly exited the cave and began their journey once more. But Reed couldn't help but feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. The tests weren't just about surviving the elements. They were about overcoming every obstacle, no matter how terrifying or unexpected. And as they moved further into the unknown, Reed knew one thing for sure. The true test had only just begun. A dangerous discovery. The cold wind howled as Reed and his team moved cautiously across the rocky terrain, their footsteps echoing in the silence. The flare had been a success, but it had drawn the attention of the other competitors, both alien and human. Now they had to move quickly before they were caught in a dangerous confrontation. The pressure was mounting, and Reed could feel the weight of responsibility resting on his shoulders. "We need to make it to the next marker," Mark said, glancing at the map. "If we don't, we'll fall behind, and we can't afford that." Reed nodded. They had to keep pushing forward, no matter what. The alien teams were starting to regroup, and the competition was becoming fiercer with every passing minute. But it wasn't just the other competitors they had to worry about. The true danger of this challenge was the environment itself, the hostile land that had been designed to test every participant's survival skills. Sarah, always the sharpest, spotted something unusual in the distance. "Captain, look over there," she said, pointing toward a set of jagged cliffs in the distance. Something was moving at the base of the cliffs, something large and dangerous. Reed squinted against the harsh wind. "It's another creature," he said, his voice low. "Let's go around it. We don't want to risk an encounter right now." But as they moved to take a detour, the ground beneath them suddenly shifted. The rocks cracked and shifted underfoot, sending a shockwave through the team. Before Reed could react, the ground gave way, and they were falling. Everything happened in an instant. The team tumbled down into a deep ravine, the sharp rocks scraping against their clothes and skin as they tried to regain control. Reed's heart pounded as he reached out to grab hold of a rock ledge, his fingers just barely catching the edge. Sarah and Mark followed, managing to scramble to safety, but the fall had left them shaken. Reed pulled himself up, breathing heavily. "Is everyone okay?" he asked, checking over his team. Sarah nodded, but Mark was wincing in pain, his arm twisted awkwardly. "I think I sprained it," Mark grunted, trying to adjust his arm, but the pain was obvious. "But I can keep going." "Take it easy," Reed ordered, scanning their surroundings. The ravine was steep and narrow, the cliffs rising high above them. It was almost like a natural trap. "We'll have to move carefully." Despite the pain, Mark nodded, and they began to move forward. The ravine was deeper than they had anticipated, and the way forward was blocked by massive boulders and twisted roots that jutted out from the rocky walls. The path was narrow, and every step had to be calculated. "This place feels unnatural," Sarah said, her voice tense. "It's like the land itself is trying to trap us." Reed's instincts were on high alert. The ravine didn't just feel dangerous. It felt like it had been designed to be that way. But he pushed those thoughts aside. They couldn't afford to waste time on speculation. Every minute counted. As they made their way deeper into the ravine, they stumbled upon something that made them stop in their tracks. A series of strange symbols were etched into the rock walls, glowing faintly in the dim light. The symbols were unlike anything the team had seen before, and their eerie glow seemed to pulse with an energy of its own. "What do you make of this?" Mark asked, his voice filled with awe and suspicion. Reed examined the symbols closely. "I don't know, but they're not natural. This is definitely something left behind. Maybe by the creators of the challenge." Sarah stepped forward, her hand brushing the symbols. The moment she touched them, the ground trembled. Reed's heart skipped a beat as he saw a massive rock formation shift and begin to move. It was a massive stone creature, an ancient dormant construct that had been hidden beneath the surface of the ravine. "What in the universe is that?" Mark gasped. "It's a trap," Reed said, his voice hard with realization. "We've been walking straight into it." The stone creature's eyes glowed with a deep, unnatural light as it began to move, slowly at first, but growing faster as it sensed the intruders. The team had no time to react. It was massive, easily 20 feet tall, its stone limbs creaking as it shifted into a defensive position. "We need to move, now," Reed shouted, pulling Mark and Sarah into motion. The team turned to flee, scrambling over the jagged rocks as the stone creature roared and began to pursue them. The creature's movements were slow but deliberate, its stone limbs pounding against the earth with each step. It wasn't just chasing them, it was hurting them, forcing them toward a dead end. "We're being cornered," Sarah shouted. "Where do we go?" Reed's mind raced. There had to be a way out. The ravine was closing in on them, and there were only a few options left. Behind them, the creature loomed closer, its massive stone arms reaching for them. "Over there," Reed shouted, pointing to a narrow opening in the ravine wall. It wasn't much of a gap, but it was their only chance. The team sprinted toward it, narrowly avoiding the creature's crushing grip. As they dove into the gap, they heard the massive stone creature slam into the wall behind them, its roar echoing through the ravine. The shockwave from the impact shook the ground beneath their feet, but the team managed to squeeze through into a small, hidden cave on the other side. Panting heavily, they huddled together, their hearts racing. They had barely escaped with their lives. "That was too close," Sarah muttered. Reed nodded grimly. "We can't afford to make any more mistakes. From now on, every move counts." The team took a moment to catch their breath and regroup, but Reed knew that this challenge was far from over. If anything, it was only getting more dangerous, and they were running out of time. "We've got to keep moving," Reed said, his voice steady. "This isn't just a test of survival anymore. It's a fight for our lives." A hidden enemy. The cave was cold, damp, and silent except for the sound of their ragged breathing. Reed scanned the narrow space, his eyes darting between the shadows. It was too quiet. Far too quiet. The air felt thick, like something was watching them from the darkness. "Do you think it's gone?" Mark asked, his voice shaky from the near-death experience. "I don't know," Reed replied, his eyes narrowing as he listened for any sounds outside the cave. "But I'm not taking any chances. We need to be ready for anything." They huddled together in the small cave, their bodies pressed against the cold stone walls as they tried to calm their nerves. Mark was still clutching his arm, and Reed could tell the pain hadn't eased. The team's movements had become sluggish, and their focus had started to slip. The adrenaline that had kept them moving earlier was beginning to fade. "We have to keep going," Sarah said, breaking the tense silence. "The competition is still on. We can't afford to rest for long." Reed nodded. "You're right. We don't know what's waiting for us out there, but if we stay here too long, it could be worse." Before they could make a decision, a faint sound echoed through the cave. It was a low, grating noise, like something, or someone, was dragging itself along the stone floor. The sound was getting closer, and Reed's senses went on high alert. The creature was still out there. He motioned for the team to stay quiet and crouched down to peer out of the cave entrance. The shadows outside were deep, and the pale light from the distant sun was not enough to illuminate much. Reed's eyes adjusted, and that's when he saw it, a figure, barely visible in the dim light, moving stealthily through the ravine. "It's not the stone creature," Reed muttered to himself. "It's something else." The figure was humanoid in shape, but its movements were erratic and unnatural. It had the appearance of an alien, but not one that Reed had seen before. The figure was tall, its skin a pale, almost translucent hue. It moved with a fluid, unsettling grace, like it didn't belong to this world at all. Reed held up a hand to stop the others from making a sound. The figure passed by the cave entrance, unaware of the team's presence. Reed felt a chill run down his spine. There was something off about it, something dangerous. "We can't let it see us," Reed whispered. "Stay down, and don't move a muscle." They waited in the silence, hearts pounding as the figure slowly moved past their hiding spot. Reed's mind raced. Who, or what, was that? And why was it here? It didn't look like one of the alien competitors, and it didn't belong to the creatures that had created the deadly environment of the challenge. This was something else entirely. The figure continued its path, seemingly unaware of their presence. But just as Reed was about to breathe a sigh of relief, a sudden rustling noise echoed from behind them. A strange, shifting sound that didn't belong to the ravine. It was coming from deeper within the cave. Reed's pulse quickened. Another threat? Or had the first one returned? He motioned for Sarah and Mark to stay put, then slowly crept towards the source of the noise. His footsteps were careful, deliberate. The sound grew louder, almost as if it were moving toward them. Reed's hand instinctively reached for the weapon at his side, an emergency flare gun. It wasn't much, but it might be their only chance if they had to fight. As Reed rounded a corner in the cave, he was met with the sight of a strange object, an ancient-looking artifact, half buried beneath the stones. It was glowing faintly, its surface etched with intricate symbols, similar to those they had seen earlier in the ravine. This was no ordinary object. This was something of great importance, perhaps even a key to understanding the true nature of this challenge. Reed crouched down to examine the artifact more closely. His fingers brushed over the markings, and suddenly, the ground beneath him trembled. Mark and Sarah rushed to his side, their faces filled with concern. "What's happening?" Mark asked, looking around nervously. "I don't know," Reed said, his voice tense. "But whatever this is, it's not just part of the challenge. It's something bigger." Just then, the cave walls began to glow faintly. The symbols on the artifact pulsed with an eerie light, and Reed realized that it was reacting to the artifact's presence. The walls seemed to come alive, the very stone shifting and changing as if they were part of some larger mechanism. "This is no accident," Sarah said, her voice filled with awe. "We're not just in a survival game. We're in the middle of something far bigger than we imagined." Before Reed could respond, the ground shook again, this time much harder. The walls cracked, and dust began to fall from the ceiling. The air grew heavier, and a sense of danger flooded the cave. "We need to get out of here now," Reed ordered, but it was already too late. The entrance to the cave began to close, the rocks shifting and grinding together as the trap began to spring shut. The team scrambled to find an escape route, but the walls were closing in, and there was no way out. "We're trapped," Mark yelled, panic creeping into his voice. Reed's heart raced. There had to be another way out. He spotted a narrow passageway in the back of the cave, hidden from view by the debris. Without thinking, he grabbed Sarah and Mark and pulled them toward it. "This way," Reed shouted. "We've got to move fast." The team raced through the narrow passage, the sound of the cave collapsing behind them. The danger was far from over, and the true nature of the challenge was starting to reveal itself. The team had thought they were just fighting for survival, but now they were fighting for something much greater than they ever imagined. The walls continued to shake, and Reed could feel the ground beneath him tremble. Something was coming, something much worse than anything they had faced so far. But one thing was clear: they had no choice but to keep moving forward. The hidden truth. The narrow passageway felt like it was closing in on them, its walls slick with moisture and the air thick with dust. The team raced through it, each step echoing in the confined space. Reed's mind was spinning. The danger they were facing now seemed even greater than the survival contest itself. The ground continued to shake beneath their feet, the sound of shifting rocks and cracking stone growing louder with every passing second. "We can't keep running forever," Mark shouted, his voice strained as he tried to keep up with Reed and Sarah. Reed glanced back, his brow furrowing with concern. They had to get to the surface, to safety, but the cave seemed endless, twisting and turning in ways that made no sense. Every time they thought they were nearing an exit, the tunnel seemed to stretch further away. "Just a little longer," Reed urged, his voice steady despite the rising panic in his chest. "We have to find out what's causing this." As they pressed on, they finally came to a wide, open chamber. The shaking stopped, but the air felt heavier, like something was watching them. Reed's heart pounded in his chest, and Sarah's hand instinctively tightened on her weapon. "Stay alert," Reed said, his voice low. The chamber was dark, but there was something faintly glowing in the distance. Sarah squinted toward the light, her eyes widening as she recognized the shape. That's the symbol," she whispered. Reed nodded, his heart sinking. The symbols that had appeared on the artifact. They were everywhere now. The walls of the chamber were covered in glowing runes, and in the center of the room was a strange metallic structure that seemed to hum with energy. It looked ancient, much older than anything the team had seen so far, and it was clearly the source of the strange vibrations they had felt earlier. "What's going on?" Mark asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," Reed admitted, "but this is bigger than we thought. This isn't just a test. We're in the middle of something far more dangerous." Reed stepped closer to the structure, his hand hovering just above it. It looked like some kind of control panel, but the technology was unlike anything he had seen before. The surface was etched with the same symbols, and as he reached out to touch it, the structure pulsed, sending a jolt of energy through the air. Suddenly, a voice rang out, cold and mechanical. "You shouldn't have come here." Reed whipped around, his heart racing. The voice came from a figure standing at the entrance of the chamber. It was tall and humanoid, but its features were obscured by a hooded cloak, its face hidden in the shadows. It spoke in a language Reed couldn't understand, but the tone was unmistakably hostile. "Who are you?" Reed demanded, his hand tightening on his weapon. The figure didn't respond, but its presence was enough to send a chill down their spines. "Move back, now," the figure commanded in a low growl, its voice carrying a deep, unsettling resonance. The words were clear now, and Reed's instincts screamed at him to run. But he didn't. Not yet. "We're not leaving," Reed said, his voice steady. "We need to know what this is. What is this place?" The figure stepped forward, and as it did, the ground beneath them rumbled again. This time, it wasn't the cave shaking. No, This was something else, a deep, unsettling tremor that seemed to originate from the very core of the planet itself. The walls of the chamber seemed to vibrate with energy, and the strange symbols on the walls began to pulse faster, almost as if they were alive. "You're meddling with forces you can't understand," the figure warned, its voice growing colder. "This is not a game. This is a test for your survival, yes, but also for your sanity." Reed took a step back, the weight of the figure's words sinking in. This wasn't just a test designed to measure their physical abilities. No, this was something deeper, something that went far beyond the survival game they had signed up for. "What kind of test?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling with both fear and curiosity. The figure stepped closer, and Reed instinctively raised his weapon, ready to defend himself and his team. But the figure didn't attack. Instead, it reached up and pulled back its hood, revealing its true face. Reed's breath caught in his throat as the figure's appearance was fully revealed. It was alien, yes, but not like any alien they had encountered before. Its skin was a shimmering, translucent blue, and its eyes were large, black, and empty, like two endless voids. The being looked ancient, far older than any species Reed had ever seen. It was something between a machine and a living organism, something unnatural, something powerful. "We are the creators of this test," the alien said, its voice now softer, yet still filled with an unsettling authority. "But it is not the test you think. This world is a prison, and you are part of the reckoning." "The reckoning?" Reed repeated, his mind spinning. "What do you mean?" The alien's expression seemed almost pitying, its cold eyes staring down at them. "You are not here by chance. You were chosen, and you are not the first to test your limits in this way." Reed's mind raced as the alien's words settled over him. The truth was beginning to take shape, but it was far darker than anything they had imagined. They weren't just fighting to survive anymore. They were part of something far larger, far more dangerous. And now it was clear. There was no turning back. The reckoning unfolds. The chamber grew colder, the walls now pulsing with an eerie glow. Reed could feel his heart thumping in his chest, and every instinct told him to run. But his feet were rooted to the ground, as if the gravity of the situation had a hold on him. The alien's words hung in the air like a heavy fog, suffocating any hope of escape. "You are here because you were chosen," the alien repeated, its voice now resonating deeply within the chamber. "And you are not the first. Many have come before you, humans and others, but none have succeeded." Reed exchanged a quick glance with Sarah and Mark. The weight of the alien's words was too much to ignore. This was no ordinary survival game. They had stumbled into something ancient, something far beyond their understanding. "Why us?" Sarah asked, her voice shaky but determined. "Why were we chosen?" The alien's eyes flickered, a faint emotion crossing its otherwise expressionless face. "Because Earth's people have the potential to change the course of history. Your species has untapped power, but that power must be tested. If you pass, you will be free to return to your world. But if you fail, your minds will be erased, and you will become part of this prison." Mark stepped forward, anger flashing in his eyes. "You're saying we're just pawns. You've been playing with us all along." The alien didn't flinch, its gaze unwavering. "Pawns, perhaps, but you are also the key to unlocking something far greater. A weapon, an ancient force buried deep within the core of your world. It was sealed away to prevent it from being used. But you, humanity, you are close to awakening it. The question is, will you control it, or will it control you?" Reed's mind reeled. A weapon, an ancient force. He had heard stories of the lost civilizations, of powers too great to be handled. But never had he imagined that Earth itself could hold such a secret. "We were just here for a test," Reed said, his voice strained. "We were supposed to survive, to prove ourselves. You're telling us that we're part of some bigger game. Yes, the alien said simply. But understand this. The test you face is nothing compared to what lies ahead. You have seen the surface, but the true trial is underground, in the heart of your planet. You will have to descend into the core of Earth to discover what has been hidden for eons. The force that lies there, if unleashed, could reshape the universe, but be warned. If you fail, it will consume everything. A chilling silence filled the room as Reeves, Sarah, and Mark processed the alien's words. The stakes were higher than they had ever imagined. Their survival wasn't just about winning a contest anymore. It was about preventing the destruction of Earth, and perhaps much more than that. We're not going to let that happen, Reed said, his voice firm. He wasn't sure if he believed it, but he had no choice but to say it. We'll stop it. We'll control it. The alien's expression remained unchanged. You may think you can, but you will have to face the truth. The power you seek is not something you can wield with ease. It will test your will, your loyalty, and your morality. And the deeper you go, the harder it will be to turn back. A sudden noise broke the tension, a low rumble that grew louder with each passing second. Reed's eyes snapped toward the entrance of the chamber. The walls began to shake again, the ground vibrating beneath their feet. It's beginning, the alien said, its voice calm despite the chaos unfolding around them. The test is no longer in your hands. The reckoning has begun. Before Reed could react, the alien raised its hand, and the chamber's walls began to shift. A large stone door slid open, revealing a narrow path leading deep into the Earth's core. A deep, dark void stretched before them, and Reed could feel the temperature drop as they gazed into the abyss. This is where your journey truly begins, the alien said. Down there, you will find what you are looking for. But beware, the deeper you go, the more it will reveal about you, your true selves. Reed felt a cold shiver run down his spine, but he knew what he had to do. He had to protect Earth, protect his people. They had come this far, and they couldn't back down now. He turned to Sarah and Mark. We're in this together. Let's finish what we started. With one final, determined look at the alien, Reed stepped forward into the darkness. Sarah and Mark followed closely behind him, their steps echoing as they entered the unknown. The passage ahead seemed endless, the air thick with the weight of what was to come. But they had no choice. The test was no longer a game. The fate of Earth, and perhaps the universe, rested on their shoulders. As they descended deeper, the truth of the alien's words began to sink in. This wasn't just a test of survival. It was a test of humanity itself. Would they be strong enough to control the power buried deep within their planet? Or would they be consumed by it, like all those who had come before them? The reckoning had begun, and there was no turning back.